The following program is a Town of Colonie television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library.
Someone in our library who's from Poland, I'm always mispronouncing his name. I didn't mention this last time because C-SPAN was here, but if you say his name, Pietrusza, that means parsley, right? That's correct. So here's David without the K sound. Oh, I have to show you this one quick thing. David sent me this, I hope you can see it. It's Teddy Roosevelt reading David's book. And David's been sending me some of the reviews. This book's getting really good reviews. He sent me up 3 or 4 online, so the library has a couple of copies if you want to check it out, or you can buy one from them. So we're going to hear the rest of the story of TR's last war. David?
TR, people will ask me why I wrote a certain book, and, TR has been done probably more than Lincoln's Doctor's Dog, very well covered by Edmund Morris and now Doris Kearns Goodwin and a bunch of people who's, sort of fading into the rear view mirror of authorship. But he's been done a lot. But I think that authors, when they get to this period of his life, are a bit exhausted by the man. And because he's such an interesting and kaleidoscopic president. He is the most interesting of American presidents, and he may be the most interesting of all Americans. He's the Rough Rider and the cowboy and the conservationist and the African and Amazonian explorer, all of those things, the trust buster, the fellow who took Panama and let Congress debate, speak softly and carry a big stick. Really larger than life, and intellectual as well. A lot of people, of presidents and famous people, have ghostwriters. Theodore Roosevelt writes his own books, a lot of them. He writes newspaper columns. He's a magazine editor. He's also a great naturalist. He's one of the foremost experts on birding, probably in the world, an encyclopedic knowledge, and a man with a photographic memory. So he, unlike myself, who has one of the world's worst memories for faces, would recognize each and every one of you and remember something that that came up 3 or 4 years before that. So a remarkably engaging fellow, but as this book starts, the kaleidoscope of his life and personality the glass has some jagged edges. And the story begins there's a vignette in Columbus, Ohio, but the narrative really actually commences in Syracuse, where he's on trial because he's been sued by the boss, the Republican boss of Albany, New York. Fancy that, William Barnes. TR had made a statement attacking the Tammany Democrats and saying how crooked they were in running city government and state government, and they were in collusion with corrupt elements in the Republican Party. And Bill Barnes, who is a very conservative Republican, says, I'm going to finish off Theodore Roosevelt. I'm going to make him pay for this remark. I'm going to end what's left of his career. That's okay. That's all right. That was, if I were giving a talk on Simon Cowell Coolidge, I would say he was called that because he would always tell people to silence their cell phones. But there were no cell phones in Theodore Roosevelt's day, so I can't do that. That's okay, because I might sound the alarm myself. But anyway, so he's being sued by Barnes, and he's going to win that case because he gets on the stand and he doesn't so much address the attorneys, but he addresses the jurors, and he is charm himself, and he can remember everything. And he kind of blows Barnes away. One of his character witnesses, one of the witnesses for Barnes is Al Smith, and one of the character witnesses for TR is Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But TR wins that lawsuit, but what's important about that incident is that he's there in Syracuse surrounded by a bunch of reporters. So that when the Germans sink the Lusitania in May 1915, they don't have to come searching him out on Long Island to Oyster Bay, to Sagamore Hill, climb up that great big hill. They're there. And he can seize that moment. And he seizes it in attacking the Germans, attacking them for killing women and children and civilians on a passenger liner, and for killing Americans. So he is outraged. And what he does at this moment is to declare war, not so much on Germany, but on Woodrow Wilson. This is the third day I've been giving this talk in a row. So I think we're not giving it tomorrow. The Woodrow Wilson at this time goes off to Philadelphia, and he addresses 4,000 new citizens. They're being naturalized, they're being sworn in. Many of them are Germans. And he says, sometimes a nation is too proud to fight. Theodore Roosevelt was never too proud to fight. Through his career, going back to 1889, he's making statements, we've got to get into war with Spain. We've got to get into war with Britain. Then we can seize Canada. We've got to get into war with Germany over a dispute over Samoa, okay? And he says, you know, it wouldn't be such a bad thing if our cities were bombarded and brought to some ruin, if that would teach Americans to be prepared and to get a decent defense situation. It's like, hello. Or talking to the Naval College, which is one of the most warlike speeches in American history, and saying there is no glory in peacetime equal to the glory found in war. So he goes off and he gets his war, his splendid little war with Spain in 1898. But after this Lusitania is sunk, TR goes after Woodrow Wilson hammer and tongs for not being tough enough on Germany and not preparing enough for war if war comes. Now, there's another upstate angle to this whole situation in that TR has an old friend, and his name is General Leonard Wood. They had known each other from the 1890s in Washington. And Wood had been Army Chief of Staff under William Howard Taft, probably as a favor to Theodore Roosevelt. And Wood conceives the idea of training camps, volunteer training camps, businessmen's camps, upper middle class people's camps to train officers on their what I did on my summer vacation. I went to Plattsburgh, New York, and trained to be a soldier. And thousands of these guys do, including TR's son, Ted Jr., and Archibald. TR goes up there to inspect the whole troops one day on the parade ground and gives this inflammatory speech attacking the Woodrow Wilson administration for not being prepared. Now, bear in mind, this is at a federal military installation. Wood warns him to give a laundered version of this talk to the reporters. TR does not. And then when the War Department goes to war about this with Leonard Wood, Wood has to apologize, but TR being TR and a civilian does not. So this whole time leading up from 1915 on, TR is saying preparedness, 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 and he is in fact right. When America goes to war against Germany in April 1917, we've got an army of 83,000 soldiers. This is fewer than the casualties that the British took at the Battle of the Somme, or the French at Verdun, or the Germans at Verdun. It's pitifully small to fight a world war. He is, and when we go, we were supplying the Allies with all sorts of stuff. We were the proto-arsenal of democracy, presaging our involvement in World War II that way, and arming the Allies and Lend-Lease and all that. But when we go, we don't have American planes. We're using French planes. There's British tanks, et cetera, et cetera. our soldiers are training on Governor's Island in New York Harbor with broomsticks. So we are not prepared, and Woodrow Wilson is saying, no, we should not be drawing up war plans. And when he finds out that we are to go to war against this country or that country or that country, he's outraged by this. And the War Department officials are not, but he can't be budged on this. This is how he really resists a significant preparedness. And if you are going to want Germany to do certain things, and Germany will back off from unrestricted submarine warfare in like 1916. They issue what is called the Sussex Pledge, where they back off from doing things like sinking the Lusitania. And so in 1916, another presidential election is coming up. TR had seriously crashed his political career by attempting a comeback in 1912. Now in 1908, he turns the presidency over to his friend and former Secretary of War, William Howard Taft, after saying on election night, 1904, that he's not going to run again for another term. In 1912, he runs. And the explanation that he and his supporters give as to, well, I thought you said in 1904 that you weren't, and the explanation is this. You know, at breakfast, you may ask a man whether he wants another cup of coffee. And he says, no, I don't want another cup of coffee. But obviously, he means he only wants another cup of coffee then, not another cup of coffee for the rest of his life. Nor does TR, it was only that morning that TR didn't want another presidential term. So he runs in 1912, splits the Republican Party, enables Woodrow Wilson to go to the White House with 41% of the vote, which is even worse than William Jennings Bryan has in his worst run, his worst 3 runs, and getting clobbered for the presidency. So it's a very flukish thing made possible by Theodore Roosevelt splitting the Republican Party. So how are you going to unsplit it? Because the civil wars are the worst sort of wars. The family feuds are like, whoa, you know, I wanted that chair in the will and all that, and I'm not talking to that person. So with the stakes that high, the animus was very high, and the difference on public policy was very high. Theodore Roosevelt was moving seriously to the left after leaving the White House. The fair deal, or square deal, had morphed into the new nationalism, which called for a whole bunch of social programs, and also a restraint on judges. We talk about judges today, and you know, this issue never goes away. And the conservatives then were for protecting the independence of the judiciary, and the progressives were saying rein them in. You might have a recall of judges. To a guy like William Howard Taft, who loved the idea of the judiciary, didn't want to be president, wanted to be a Supreme Court judge, you can imagine how this affected things. So in 1916, TR has to put the parties back together again. And how is he going to do that? The answer is he doesn't know. He really doesn't know. He's very manic. We know that. He's the Energizer Bunny president and ex-president. But he can also get down on himself. And losing in 1912 and losing the esteem of so many people who had worshipped him, you know, brings him down, and he's not sure where to step or how, or will the Republicans accept him. But he goes through this charade in 1916. At one point, he's on a Caribbean cruise, and he says to a reporter that, you know, the American people should not take me for president unless they are in a heroic mood. And he's fairly whispering, do not take me, unless they are in a heroic mood. In other words, I want the presidency and I want it on my terms. The Republicans are not willing to give it to him. His progressive supporters, the hardcore, and there are some very high rollers in this party and people of significance, former cabinet members, industrialists, Wall Street magnates. They're still pushing him, media people, and he strings them along. he strings them along. We have the transcripts of phone conversations from him to his supporters in Chicago. In 1916, the Republican and Progressive parties hold their respective conventions at the same time in Chicago, a few blocks apart. So it's a question of, are they going to get together or not? And the Progressives want to immediately rush into nominating TR for their party, threatening to put a gun to the Republicans' head and say, look, if you don't nominate TR, we're going to have a three-way race again, and there's no way the Republican wins, and it's going to be Wilson again. So feeling lucky, punk. But TR is so unsure of himself that he's not willing to commit to that. He's not willing at all to commit to it. He doesn't want another suicide run like that. He wants, above all, to defeat Woodrow Wilson. In 1912, they had known each other for quite a while. It's surprising. The first person, or one of the first persons that TR sees as President of the United States in September 1901 in Buffalo, when McKinley is shot, is Woodrow Wilson, who is returning from a vacation in Ontario. And they stop and chat, and they sort of admired each other for a while, but Wilson starts making little sniping noises in the press about TR as president, and TR, who had really admired Wilson, finally starts to notice this, and then of course they run against each other in 1912, which can't help their friendship. But TR is so busy hating William Howard Taft that year, he doesn't notice how much he hates Woodrow Wilson. But he really is going to catch up on that very quickly. He's going to call him a Byzantine logo thief. I don't know what that means. But he also called him a skunk, and I know what that means. So he does not like him. He attacks him and accuses him of using weasel words and sucking all the meaning out of words, much like a weasel sucking eggs, you know. But what he's doing with the progressives, his progressive supporters in 1916, is that same sort of weasel words. So at the end of the day, the Republicans nominate not TR, and TR is nominated by the progressives, but he basically runs away. He runs away from that endorsement and says, why don't you guys nominate Henry Cabot Lodge? Which just stuns everyone, because Henry Cabot Lodge, while as much of an interventionist and a preparedness guy as Roosevelt, as much of a war lover, is by no means a progressive. No means at all. And so this just shocks and disgusts his supporters. But will they block, or will they fall in line with the Republicans, who have nominated Charles Evans Hughes, who, like TR, was governor of New York, who has been on the U.S. Supreme Court since about 1910, put there by William Howard Taft. And so he's a good candidate because he hasn't been saying anything against Taft, and he hasn't been saying anything about Roosevelt. And so he's a logical candidate who's been out of the fray, who can reunite the parties. And he's a reformer, he's a progressive, but he's not a radical. He's not like a TR at this point or a Bob LaFolla in Wisconsin. But he is on the Supreme Court, and he has to get off the Supreme Court. Woodrow Wilson knows what's going on with the Republicans, and he offers, through another Supreme Court judge, a deal to Charles Evans Hughes. And that deal is, you stay on the court and I'll make you Chief Justice. And Hughes is a guy you can't make a deal with. He's very upright. TR and Hughes do not get along. TR is fire. Charles Evans Hughes is ice. He's derided as the bearded iceberg, the bearded icicle, because he's so cold and remote. They've tangled over patronage issues in New York. TR has helped sink Hughes' abortive run for the presidency in 1908. And TR is not quite sure where Hughes is going to stand on the great issues. And the great issue to TR, as he says, as the great issue to America was in 1860, was slavery. The great issue in 1916 is war, okay, and everything else gets put beyond that. He's not sure where Hughes is going to stand on that. A lot of other people aren't sure where Hughes is going to stand, and Hughes suffers from a number of problems. One, he's running against Woodrow Wilson, who is running on a platform of peace and prosperity. The Germans are no longer sinking our ships. We're not going to war. Our boys are not going over there. We are making money hand over fist from Wall Street on down to the guys in the factories, to the farmers in the Midwest, to the miners out west, selling stuff to the Allies. So it's peace and prosperity, and that's very hard to beat. It's tough to put parties together which have split so recently. And Hughes is, sort of a colorless fellow, and he is probably the one candidate who is so overshadowed by his surrogate, okay? Imagine if in the 2016 election, Bernie was, after the convention, was getting all the publicity, okay? This is what's going on with TR and Hughes, and some people are attacking Hughes as being pro-German because he had met with some Germans in a private meeting and with some Irish Americans who were not pro-Allied. So he's accused of being pro-German, okay? And imagine sort of a meeting in Hughes Tower or something, and people are wondering what's going on there. But also people are saying, he's going to be a puppet of Theodore Roosevelt. And you know what that means? It means we're going to war against Germany. So on the one hand, Hughes is accused of being pro-German, and on the other hand, he's going to get us into war with Germany. He loses very narrowly. TR might have won if he was the candidate. Who knows? I mean, the big thing is California, which he loses by 13,000 votes, while a progressive is winning the U.S. Senate seat by 200,000. That's Hiram Johnson, who was TR's running mate in 1912. And oh, by the way, Hiram Johnson loses that Senate, or wins the Senate seat against a candidate named George S. Patton Sr., George Patton's father, who was a Democrat. And so TR issues one of those Dewey defeats Truman statements election night, because he jumps the gun and says, well, I'm just going to just fade away if Hughes is elected. I'm sure he won't ask me about anything. This is the speech he gives over and over again. 1904, I'm the vice president, I'm probably finished. 1904, I'm not running for president. I'm getting out, or don't take me in early 1916. And he's always saying, this is the end of the road for me. But in fact, he goes back in to the public eye, and he does it not so much in an overt political way, although he's still hammering Wilson all the time. He wants to go into France and fight as a guy pushing 60 years old who is blind in one eye, seriously overweight. Around this time, his wife Edith sends him to a fat farm in Connecticut. He loses 2 belt sizes, but puts it back on. He's the only guy there for his privacy and all that. But he wants to go fight there, and he has a plan, which is, I'm going to have all these regiments, and they'll be led and officered by my pals, my old political pals, my old Rough Rider pals. These guys aren't too young either. And I will have so many machine guns and this, and I'm requesting 2 horses, nice horses, not that won't throw me from the New York City Mounted Police Department, okay, that I can ride in trench warfare in World War I. Hello. So he is going to visit the White House on his way back from a trip to Florida, where he's going to, now his health is down, but he can still get back into shape, and he does on a manta ray expedition. And he's like, imagine TR as Captain Ahab, harpooning these giant creatures in his first try, and in his first trip out like this, he kills the 2nd largest female ever recorded I mean, he is just such an incredible guy. But on the way home, he stops at the White House, knocks on the door. Is Mr. Wilson there? No, he just left 10 minutes ago. And TR then doesn't wait, goes back up to New York, and in another week comes back down to the White House. This time Wilson is in. It's still unannounced, but you can't keep a secret in Washington. And Wilson receives him very cordially, but there's that old weasel word sort of thing. TR thinks, well, if it was anyone else, I think I've got the okay, but since it's Wilson, I don't think I do. And he's right. Wilson has been extremely reserved, in control of himself in this whole war of words with TR. It's a one-sided war. Wilson is not like he's tweeting back, okay? He's like Dwight Eisenhower with Joe McCarthy. I won't get in the gutter with that guy. He won't punch down. Now, maybe he should have punched back. Maybe that was causing his blood pressure to go up. Maybe he wouldn't have had those strokes. But he follows that plan and disappoints Roosevelt a great deal. And TR says to his former Secretary of War, Elihu Root, one day, you know, I was only asking President Wilson for permission to go to France and die. And Root says to him, did you make that perfectly clear to the president? Evidently not clear enough. And TR is also afraid that his sons will not be allowed. He has 4 sons, that they will not be allowed to go over either. That there will be this spite against him for all that he's done. And he's actually wrong about that. They let his sons, Ted Jr. and Archie, go in very quickly. They go overseas very quickly. They're on Pershing's staff, and then go into the front lines and combat very, very quickly, because we go into combat very slowly in World War I. Okay, TR is right on that. We husband our forces and we don't go against the Germans for quite a while. But these guys go in. Ted is wounded with shrapnel and is blinded by gas at one point. And Archie is wounded, takes a shell in the kneecap and then in his arm, which is much worse because there's nerve damage. There's like a gap of an inch in his nerves, and he's being held together almost by scotch tape after that. He's in the hospital in France for 4 months. On Armistice Day, he's back in the States. And he will be, the Roosevelts are brave, brave folks. Ted Jr., of course, is famous for his role in landing at Normandy in World War II, commanding an army there. He does, however, his forces land at the wrong beach. He's unfazed. He says, okay, the war starts here. And then he dies of a heart attack on the beach later on, still commanding his forces. Archie, who is rated 100% disabled as these things go with the military forces in World War I, goes off and fights again in World War II in the South Pacific and is shot up again and is rated 100% disabled in that war, the only American to be so rated in combat. Kermit, who is the 3rd son, who is the fellow who had accompanied TR to Africa and the Amazon, goes to fight with the British, goes to Mesopotamia, to the Near East, meets Lawrence of Arabia, learns Arabic. He's a great linguist. And since he's with the British Army, one day he comes across stumbles across a bunch of Turkish soldiers. And he doesn't have his pistol with him. But being with the British Army, he has a swagger stick. And he goes, all right, boys, surrender. We've got you. And they do. I think they know how the war is going to end up. He gets a big medal from that. Eventually goes to fight with in France with the Americans. And the 4th son is, as you heard from my previous talk here, Quentin. He's 20 years old, a sophomore at Harvard. He joins up the first week of the war, goes over as an aviator. He's very mechanical, and finally goes into combat in late June. His first mission, he gets a kill. And then on his second mission, he takes 2 shots to the head, and his plane goes down. a reporter brings the news to Sagamore Hill because he's received a telegram from France which reads, "Watch Sagamore Hill 4," and then the rest is censored. He brings this to TR. TR says, "This is not good. It's not Ted or Archie because they're shot up already. I think they're safe where they are. And Quentin is in transit. He's like in Italy at this point, although he has malaria. And so it's got to be Quentin. Don't tell Mrs. Roosevelt." And it turns out to be Quentin, that he has been shot down, but they do not know what happened. He's crashed his planes before and walked away. So is he unhurt? Is he wounded? Is he captured? Is he dead? When they find out a few days later, when the Germans drop his effects over the American lines and make an announcement that he is dead. And it's a terrible price to pay, and Theodore Roosevelt will say this at the end of his life in a letter to someone. It's all stiff upper lip with him, but he writes that it is a terrible price to pay to suffer the death of your son in a war you have argued so forcefully for. So he has gotten his war, and he has paid the price, and that is the great tragedy of the subtitle of this book. Now, I draw your attention to this fine book here, or to that fine photograph. And the reason I do that is because that is taken September 30th, 1918 in Columbus, Ohio. And what's TR, how's he carrying himself? The normal TR is his palm out, and he's slamming it over and over again to make a point. This is the TR speaking motion. I was speaking in Glens Falls last night, and the fellow said he was from Plattsburgh, and they had a picture in the movie theater of TR at Plattsburgh and giving a speech, and he was doing the exact same thing. So I told the people, see, I document these things. I even brought this guy to document it. But anyway, so that's TR's normal move. There, no, okay? He's hanging on for dear life. He's holding onto the platform with one hand and his stanchion with another. And the reason is because even before Quentin is dead and breaks his heart, and as a friend says, the boy went out of TR at that moment, in February, he's suffering from the effects of his trip to the Amazon. And he is operated on for an abscess in a very sensitive part of his body at Sagamore Hill, not in the hospital, and without anesthesia, because he's a tough guy, okay? And the next day, he goes into New York City, takes all these meetings, dictating letters, going to this place, the Harvard Club, here, there, whatever. And his secretary says, "You don't look so good. Maybe you should just stop dictating these letters today, Mr. or Colonel." No, I made a pledge. When I was president, I would clean off my desk every day. That's what I'm going to do. And he sits down on the couch and just about passes out, and the couch is covered with blood. They bring him into Roosevelt Hospital on the west side of Manhattan, and he's there for 6 weeks. And it's really a death watch for a while. The doctors do not quite know what to do. But before it reaches that stage, they have, he says, "While you've got me here, I've had some problems with my ears since the Amazon. There's some infection going on there." So they clean out both of his ears. And in cleaning out one of them, they wreck the canal and render him totally deaf. So now he's blind in one eye from a boxing match in the White House and deaf in one ear. And the worst part or maybe not the worst part, but another horrible part, aside from being deaf in one ear, is he has to learn how to walk again. When he comes out of the hospital, his sense of balance is shot, and he has to keep that up. And I think that's another reason why he's hanging on for dear life there. Now, he goes and is actually very valuable to the war effort in selling bonds. That's why he's in Columbus, Ohio. And he does the same thing in Baltimore and all around the country, and he's still pitching preparedness. He wants universal military training after the war. After the war, he wants it for women as well as men. So he's still riding that train, and he's not letting up on that. But September 30th, November 11th. Oh, and he's getting these horrible skin diseases. He has to have a doctor travel with him through the Midwest. He goes up to Boston and gets ptomaine. And then on November 11th, Armistice Day, he is in incredible pain. His sister had suffered and was kind of crippled up from rheumatism early on. And he always feared the same thing might happen to him, and it seems to be happening then. The doctors diagnose it as rheumatism, sciatica, arthritis, this, that. They're not quite sure, but whatever it is, it hurts like hell. And it's not getting any better, and they put these reports out to the press, and one thing they don't say is this guy's had a pulmonary embolism as well. He's had an embolism, pulmonary or coronary. So he's been on the bubble. He gets a fever, I think, of 103, 104 at one point. He comes out of the hospital on Christmas Eve. The doctors would have liked for him to stay longer. They think that his full recovery won't be for months after that. And concurrently, miraculously, he has somehow reunited the Republican Party because the war was the big issue. And he was the preparedness guy, and he was right. And everyone is so patriotic now, and he was the patriot par excellence. So the party is willing to turn to him in 1920, and he would have been nominated, and he would have been elected. Now, couldn't people see how sick this man was? And I think he had come back from so much, and it seemed so superhuman and so indestructible. You shoot him in Milwaukee in 1912, and he goes to the rally and speaks for 80 minutes afterwards. You know, he survives the Amazon thing. He survives, you know, just about everything. So you think, well, these things aren't going to kill him. He'll be back, and he'll be stronger than ever. But it's really not true. And the doctors even warn him that, you know, when you go out, you know, you may have to spend the rest of your life in a wheelchair. Okay? Imagine a Roosevelt getting elected to the White House in a wheelchair. Couldn't possibly happen. But so he comes back, and he's winding down again. The pain is so intense that he cannot even sign his name to documents, to letters, and he's begging off of all sorts of speaking engagements. He's going to send Archie, who has come stateside, to speak in his stead to a war rally in Manhattan. Archie can't make it because Archie gets on a train and is going up to Boston with his wife to see his father-in-law, who is dying. And he gets off the train outside of Boston and receives word that Theodore Roosevelt, his father, has died in his sleep. And he writes to his brothers in Germany, the old lion is gone. And Thomas Marshall, Woodrow Wilson's vice president, probably says it best, that death had to take Theodore Roosevelt in his sleep because there would have been a fight any other way. And I'm not sure who would have won that. Although there's an epilogue in the book which raises some very interesting issues, which I'd say read the book.
How old was Franklin Roosevelt
at that time? Boy, well, he's 51 in 1933, so, you know, he's still in his 30s. Yeah, he's a young guy. He's a young guy, and he's fit. He hasn't had polio until 1921. Yeah, so he's in great shape. The age thing is significant because TR, you know, he's so vigorous and doesn't slow down when he leaves the presidency. He's not like Dwight Eisenhower or something. FDR assumes the White House at age 51. TR leaves at 50. So, you know, that's why he goes off and shoots half the animals in Africa. So thank you all for coming. Oh, question?
How old was Theodore when he died?
60. 60. October 27th, okay, was his last birthday. And when he's in the hospital, he says to his younger sister, you remember the promise I made when I was young? She says, no, Theodore, what are you talking about? I said that I would live to the hilt until I was 60. And then after that, whatever happens. Yes?
Apparently, we didn't learn a lot about pre-war preparation. There's a very interesting book by David Brinkley called Washington Goes to War.
Yes.
Which chronicles our terrible lack of preparation before World War II. And it's very similar to what you said about training with sticks and guns.
Right.
And how in the ranking of armies, we were way down.
I think we were below Chile in 1917, or Chile, as they say now.
I recommend.
Yeah, I open my book on 1948 with a passage or citing David Brinkley going to the White House, because he's like this young, he's really young, and he goes and he sees FDR looking awful. He's like gray, and he's lost like 3 shirt sizes or something, and it's like, holy cow. So again, like people see what they want to see. People compartmentalize in their mind. So, and also if you see someone every day, okay, you don't quite notice that they've, all of a sudden that they're like, 70 years old or something. But if you haven't seen them in a while, or you've only seen them from the newsreels or older newsreels, and it's like, it's quite a shock to you. So the people around TR probably couldn't recognize that, and the people around FDR, if they did, were sort of just holding their fingers to see what would cross until what would happen next.
You didn't mean 48, did you, with Brinkley?
The book 1948. I opened my book 1948 with that.
What year did Brinkley see Roosevelt?
He would have seen him probably in late 44, maybe early 45. Yeah, right at the end. Yeah. Yes.
Was there ever an attempt to assassinate TR?
Well, after the presidency, yes, in Milwaukee. But actually, where he has a close call, which is not an assassination attempt. He's shot by this deranged New York City German-born bartender named John Schrank in Milwaukee in 1912, who's been tailing him. And I came across something interesting the other day, that Schrank was a bachelor. I think a lot of assassins are bachelors. I mean, maybe not Lee Harvey Oswald, but the Schrank lost his fiancée, or his only girlfriend, when the General Slocum sinks, and it cost 1,000 lives of German Americans in like 1902, 1903 in New York City at the Harlem River. It was a really badly inspected boat. And it was supposed to be inspected by the feds, and who was president. I've never seen a connection to what might have set Schrank off as to want to kill him later on. They link it to that he was obsessed by McKinley, and McKinley would appear to him in dreams and all that. But that was the assassination attempt of TR. He also narrowly escapes death as president right after becoming president in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. And he's visiting, I think, probably Senator Murray Crane, who was the U.S. Senator from that part of Massachusetts. And he's in a horse-drawn carriage with some Secret Service guys, and a electric trolley car comes down the hill and smashes into TR's carriage. And it kills one of the Secret Service guys, really messes up another one, and hits TR in the, hurts him in the leg fairly badly. And TR being TR, and even though he's like messed up, gets up, yells at the motorman, "Look what you've done, man!" And which he should be mad, because one of the Secret Service guys is killed. But he then becomes sick with some sort of infection or something later on that year, and is laid up for a few months. So he has a non-assassination health scare in the while he is president. Yes,
That story about the Slocum is very interesting.
it's an incredible story.
Apparently they got a fire in the engine room that got out of control.
Yeah.
And they tried to ram it onto the beach, but they didn't make
Well, what they should have done was ram it. Well, nothing was inspected. The life jackets were rotten. The boats were no good, and what they had was 1,000. It was like a big social thing. People would get on these boats and have a picnic somewhere, like in the wilds of upstate, i.e., the Bronx. Okay, and so there's 1,000, largely women and children on this boat. Germans from the Lower East Side. The Lower East Side had a sizable German population at that time, and the captain should have rammed it, but what he did was he kept going, and he put the pedal to the metal, and oxygen with a fire caused it to really turn it into a Holocaust, and so many were dead there. What happens to that part, and if you go to the Lower East Side, you can still see some of the tops of buildings inscribed in German. It's not Jewish or Hebrew or German. And what happens is that the survivors are so bummed out that they all pick up and go, because the memories of 1,000 dead in one New York City neighborhood are too much for them to take, and that's one reason why the German neighborhood eventually goes up to Yorkville, up in the East 80s. Yeah. Joe?
He's so larger than life, you think he'd be the good subject for a hip-hop Broadway musical?
Yeah, that could happen. Yeah, and then maybe if they could buy the rights to some book about a particularly interesting period of his life, maybe poignant even. Okay.
maybe Trump could play.
Yes.
I may have missed it, but you were recounting the legacy that he left behind, and I didn't hear the mention of the 150,000 letters that are in the archive.
Yeah.
That, so our today's reporter is going to write about current presidents. Nobody's writing letters anymore.
It's they actually, well, they write some and they don't write others. He dictates a lot of letters. Okay, he keeps his secretaries busy transcribing these things. When it was for my book 1920, I got a call from my publisher one day, and they said, "You have a letter." I go, "Yeah." "It's from the White House." "Yeah." It was when George W. Bush was in the White House. And I go, "Yeah." And they said, "We opened it." I said, "Thanks." And it was a letter from George W. Bush. He enjoyed the book, and it was handwritten. I have since learned, because I've been contacted by, I guess, a rather prominent autograph collector, that handwritten letters on White House stationery are incredibly rare nowadays, okay? And I won't say what I was offered. But something about it was like, getting a letter from the President of the United States and turning around and selling it is sort of like selling your combat medals. It just didn't seem right, I mean, what'll happen at the end is I'll die, and like my wife will throw it out. It'll be at a garage sale or an estate sale. But I'm sticking to this until until the mortgage comes due, I guess.
Antiques Roadshow 10 years from now.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think I have to wrap it up. I'm due somewhere else. But thank you all for coming.